Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the second of our online assemblies. How can socially engaged practice inspire structural change? I am Elizabeth Del Prete, Senior Curator of Learning and Live Research at our projects. And I'm a white woman with long curly brown hair, and I'm wearing a pink flowery top, and my pronouns are she, her. Taking place between March and November 2022, Constellations Assemblies are a series of free online events open for everyone to attend who is active and or interested in the expanded field of public art. And by the expanded field, we mean the work that happens at the intersection of contemporary art and culture, social practice, and the public realm. In the UK, while there are increasing opportunities for socially engaged work, particularly in urban development and regeneration programs, there are very few opportunities to develop sector-specific knowledge and skills. And to address this, our project has developed this program that is part of our wider Constellations Learning and Developments program. And we are delighted to be working in partnership with Flattime House, a partner with whom we've been collaborating for a number of years, and Liverpool Biennium, who are a new partner this year. The program of 6 events will explore lines of inquiry that we feel are most vital for the sector to pursue right now. And these include questions around sustainability, the role of democracy in social practice, issues relating to the memorial, and of course, the question that we're exploring today of structural change. If you haven't already done so, please do register for the other events in the program via the project's website. I'm delighted that today's event will be moderated by Jes Fernie, independent writer and curator. Working primarily beyond gallery walls, Jes is interested in taking conversations about art and art making into new and varied arenas. But before I hand over to her, I would quickly like to run through some virtual housekeeping. If you experience any technical issues during the event, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to chat with our dedicated tech support. On the right of your screen, you will see our Slido bar where you can post questions using the Q&A function for our speakers. Feel free to write your name when prompted, as Slido uses anonymous as its default. Please note that our chair and speakers will only be picking up questions from the Slido Q&A and not from the chat function. So please do post your questions in the Q&A to ensure they get answered. So please do look at the Slido Q&A when you input your questions for the panel to review. We have a British Sign Language interpretation available for this event. If you need a BSL interpreter, please message us in the chat and our tech assistant will give you a dedicated access link. If you'd like to access closed captions, please select the CC button at the bottom of your video conferencing screen to read along. And just to note that we will be recording the event today. I do hope you enjoyed the event today. And once again, please contact us via the chat function below if you experience any technical problems. I'm now going to hand over to Jes, who is going to kick off the event. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all to this event today. Thanks for joining us. I think we've got a really nice, healthy number of people attending, which is great. And I have to acknowledge that rather spectacularly, we managed to schedule this talk to the hour, no less. I thought that was quite special, to coincide with the deadline for applications to the Arts Council funding programme. And for those of you beyond the UK, that's organisations across the UK applying for, really important funding over the next 3 years. So I would just like to really, really thank our speakers, Nephertiti Oboshie Schandorf and Matt Jenner, for being with us today, having submitted your applications in this really particularly strange, intense period. Thank you. So as Elizabeth said, let us know in the Slido poll what role you hold in the ecosystem. It's quite interesting just to see where you're all coming from. I think artist and curator, I think, are the most prominent, but it's also interesting to see that there's architects, designers, Citizens, I like the citizen one, performers, social practice artists, writers. It's great just to see a whole range of people joining us. It's obviously interesting to know who's tuning in, but we'd also like to engage with you as much as possible and build a community of interested practitioners. So this is the second in a series of talks, and I think it's a pretty important, meaty one. We're going to be considering the ways in which socially engaged art projects can affect change in the world, or to put it another way, how these projects can kind of impact directly on people's lives. So over the next hour or so, we'd like to get a sense of the strategies that we might put in place to try and make this happen. And maybe also to discuss particular examples and types of projects that have affected change in some way. And we'll be putting links to a lot of the projects that we talk about in the Zoom chat box. So if you'd like to delve deeper into any of those, which I really recommend you do, there's some really great examples. Just keep an eye on those. And they should sort of create quite a nice resource, I think, by the end of the talk that you could maybe, use in your practice. So I thought it might be useful to begin by recognising the different ways that socially engaged art projects can affect people's lives. I've just got 3 brief ones here. So firstly, through one-off experiences for individuals who take part in one-off art projects. This could involve a series of workshops, events, or participatory activities, which could be life-changing and perhaps involve a kind of reconfiguration of a person's relationship to their community or to the world or to themselves. So that's kind of small scale and sort of based on an individual level. And then the next level, I think, is projects that could involve changes to the material conditions of specific groups of people. So, for example, a year-long education programme for children in refugee camps, or a campaign that reduces rents for a group of residents. And then finally, projects that institute structural change on a large scale, which improve the quality of many people's lives over a long, unspecified period of time. So, for example, that could mean an increase in the wages of cleaners or childcare facilities within a large sort of organisational infrastructure like a council or something. So I just wanted to recognise this kind of multi-layered and, of course, interconnected set of potential ways that these types of projects can act in the world. And obviously the long-term structural change layer is the hardest to realise. Or maybe it's not actually, maybe it's the easiest and the first one's the hardest, I don't know. But at least in terms of engagement within established societal, administrative and political systems, it's probably the hardest. But having followed this field of activity for a number of years, and I've been involved in a series of socially engaged projects myself, I've become really aware of the many and often fraught issues that artists and community members and arts organisations are faced with when realising these projects. And I just thought I'd set out a few of them for you briefly, just 3 here. So the neoliberal extractive capitalist system in which most of us work contrasts wildly, I think specifically wildly, with the ambitions of socially engaged projects. How can these 2 methodologies be married to affect social change? And then there's the financing, which I think is crucial. It's obviously an invisible element of structural change within arts organisations and projects. Can we or should we create alternative ways of financing socially engaged projects? And then finally, there's the emotional labour required to deliver these projects, which I think are kind of unparalleled in artistic and curatorial contexts. Can we find ways of dispersing or limiting this labour, or at least recognising it? So anyway, I hope that we'll address some of these issues, maybe not all of them. Maybe we'll go on to discuss far more interesting ones, I don't know, but let's see how things progress. So let me dive in straight to introduce our first speaker, Matt Jenner. I should say first that both speakers are going to, hi Matt, are going to just talk for 10 minutes in response to this question, can socially engaged practice inspire social change? And then we'll have a discussion between us, and then we'll open up for a discussion from the floor. So Matt is an artist and a curator and has worked as a curator and an arts administrator in organisations including Studio Voltaire, Former, Grand Union and Space. And he established TACO in Thamesmead in southeast London with a group of other artists 5 years ago. 5 years, yeah. And I just love the fact that I'm a bit confused about whether TACO's official name is Tracy Ain't Coming Out or Thamesmead Arts and Culture Office. I just think that's very good, excellent. When I first saw that branding, I gave you a big hooray. So the organisation is deeply rooted in its locale and organises a whole raft of really fantastic experimental collaborative projects that include workshops and participatory projects. And the organisation is specifically interested in creating dialogue between artists, audience, community and the locale in which they're situated. But I have asked Matt and Nefertiti not to specifically talk about their organisation, so they'll be addressing the question in general. So Matt, over to you.
Okay, I get to go first. Hello everyone. Okay, I'm going to jump straight into my speed presentation. So here goes. Okay. Okay, so hopefully you can all see the full screen. I was really chuffed to be asked to present for this question, actually, and I spent quite a bit of time with it as a question. And my starting point has been to think about this pivot between making art for a community and making art to create community. And quite often, a lot of what we think of social practice sort of falls between the two. Also, public art as well. I guess what I'm going to argue in a speculative sense about how social practice can engage and change structures is that it's work that creates the conditions for community that is probably the most radical thing that we can do, not just in this current time, but generally in the structures of sort of neoliberalism. So bear with me, this is a bit speculative, but what I'm trying to say is creating community is about creating space and time for people to form relationships, for people to have an exchange, for there to be ideas, for people to be bored, for people not to be productive, for people to show care, for people to express solidarity, for people to have agency, for people to actualize things in their life. And then this morning I also added, and also for people to protest. And so this idea of time and space being something that's not just physical, but also mental. And so, I mean, I think about this a lot in the work that I do. And in thinking about this question, I was thinking about space and time for people and carving out space and time for people in structures, so that's where change can happen. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to look very briefly at 4 examples of projects that kind of illustrate this. And 2 of them are not the usual suspects. 2 of them are deliberately, I've chosen them because they're not what you would identify as social practice, but they have social practice within them as a methodology. And I think they're interesting as part of the strategy by which they're realized as projects. So the first one, and the first ideal, the first strategy is this idea of, like, as an organization of social practice, or an organization that embodies social practice in the way that it runs. And I'm sure we're going to touch more on this when we have a discussion, but the first organization I wanted to talk about is Grand Union, which is in Birmingham, and they are an artist-led organization, or they have studios. That's how they started. They have a curatorial program, they do exhibitions, commissions, but they also have a collaborative program. And this particular project is a project called the Growing Project, which was started a few years ago by Joe Capper, who's the collaborations curator there. And what it does is it takes disused land and turns it, makes it productive, but it's also works specifically with people who are vulnerably housed. So we're talking about people who are some of the most vulnerable and at risk in the city of Birmingham. And the pilot project for this worked with 60 people, and they made gardens, they grew food, they made the plates for the food to be served on. And then so what we're talking about is a group of 60 people who are, for all intents and purposes, invisible, becoming productive, growing food, and then sharing that with others. So the whole project sort of pivots on this idea of value and production and invisibility and sort of power and the relationships that we have in society. And that's where the poetry is, I guess, in the project. So this project is now expanded so that it's like 5 or 6 sites. It involves other artists in supporting the project. Grand Union have begun to commission artists in response to it. So Alberta Whittle recently made a boffy for one of the gardens. And what it's done is also expanded the idea of what an arts organisation is. And there's no way I think that you can extrapolate now the growing project and Grand Union's work with these people and these communities from who they are as an organisation. They're also undertaking a big capital project, and this project is sort of really informing how the new building will be used and people's access to it. So I thought that was really interesting. The next one is what I'm calling artists, social entrepreneurs. This is actually a really similar project to the Growing Project, but it was initiated by Catherine Baum. It was commissioned by Create in London, and essentially it's called Company Drinks. And this is a drawing by Catherine of like essentially the business model. And what she did was establish the social enterprise that makes drinks from local ingredients, local producers, works with a whole range of people. It's run cooperatively. It runs a program of events, workshops, activities with people. So it has moments of publicness, but at its heart, what it is a community-run company. And so what that's providing is a space within space for people to form community, space for people to earn money, to learn new skills, to form relationships, and so forth. Right. So the next one is, and this is not the usual suspect, and not something you would recognise as social practice in its form. It's Maria Eichhorn, and she's a conceptual artist. And what she does, Maria, is that she engages with institutions and engages with the sort of socio-economic and cultural dynamics of institutions to kind of detone them or kind of hijack them or kind of somehow kind of sort of show the contradictions in them and so forth. And what Maria did was that she was commissioned by Chisenhale to do a piece of work. And after speaking to people who worked at Chisenhale, she came up with a proposal to close the gallery and use her production budget to pay for staff to have the 5 weeks off. Now, for me, like this, on one level, this is sort of a conceptual gesture and it's a kind of spectacle, but behind this is a load of social production of where, you know, what did the people that had the time off, what did they produce? What relationships did they make? I would be really interested to know whether people came back to work. You know, how did this change their life? And this is a temporary space that Maria has made, but you know, this kind of agent of change strategy is really interesting. And then the last one is, and I've called this artist as activist. Now, this is an artist that we're working with is Africa Karoun, and she's an Irish artist. She's not an activist. That's not what Avril, she wouldn't call herself that, but what she does is, and what she's interested in doing is, she's interested in the social conditions of materials. So what this project is called Got Damp, and what she's been doing is collecting damp from people in across southeast London in order to make some an installation that she's making for TACO next year. And in the course of making this project, she's been engaging with people who are suffering from sort of poor housing, and collecting their stories as part of the research. So she's involving people in the research of this work. But what's interesting about this is that she's also using the research to support people to address their housing problems. So I'll give you an example of this. And this is a short film, it's about 30 seconds.
And we were away for less than a week. And I came back and it wasn't winter, it was mid-August. And that was when that wet happened. But it seemed to come from nowhere. They haven't found the source of the water. But when I asked next door, can you think of any reason why I would have had water come through the front of the property? She said up on the landing above, there was water gushing out one day and the fire brigade came. So it was either a flood or a burst pipe from upstairs. So that's the only thing I can think, well, it possibly has come through. Yeah. But you'd think that even that would dry come the end of the summer. But this has continued and continued.
So what Avril's doing is she's in the production of the work, she's been taking a thermal camera with her, and then she's given this film. This is just a short clip, but she's been giving this documentation, if you like, to people in order for them to lobby their landlord. She's also providing them with advice and guidance about how to address it. And so there's this question about her project. Not what she's trying to do is not be extractive. She's trying to make this a kind of her project have a social impact in the way that it's made. So people are giving her their damp, and what she's doing is giving them tools for them to address the issue. Okay, so that's me. That's my very short run through.
Thanks very much, Matt. They were great examples. I'm sure we'll have lots to discuss in a bit. I'm going to move swiftly on to introduce Nefertiti. Nephertiti Oboshie Schandorf is a producer of site-responsive performances, audio and moving image works installed in non-gallery settings. And her practice is one that actively seeks collaboration and is informed by the creation of protected networks and cultural archives. And I first met Nefertiti when she was a curating student at the RCA, I don't know, 5 years ago or something. She's gone on to do incredible things with Manchester and Whitworth galleries, Art on the Underground, Somerset House, the Singapore Biennial and the City of London. She's currently the artistic director of Peckham Platform, a creative and educational arts organisation founded in South London, which works to support local communities and artists to co-produce. And I've just picked this from your website because I thought it worked really well within the context of today's event, to co-produce social art that responds directly to the needs of community members. So Nefertiti, over to you.
Thank you very much, Matt. I'd love to catch up a bit more about the projects that you've mentioned here. And thank you, Jes, for the lovely introduction. I recognise I've got 10 minutes to take you through. I'm going to share my screen. And Elizabeth, I might need a text just to let me know that I'm close to time. Thank you. And just to check, can everyone see the screen? Can anyone see me? No, okay, so just going to let you know a little bit about my thought process when it comes to this question of how can socially engaged practice inspire structural change. I found this question difficult to begin with. I was tempted to go straight through with something along the lines of an ABCs of ways to succeed in social art and social art practice and how that can change things. But I realized that I've had to, over the last 20 or so years of my careers, plural, learn what the social is. Like, what does this mean in a society that's formed of multitudes and that contains multitudes within cultures, within heritage, and within our own bodies. Kingitsu comes to mind. That is the craft of repairing damaged ceramics with gold. But then again, that also implies a type of trauma rather than a multitude. And perhaps we're better suited to consider society as rhizomatic. That is connections and separations and interdependencies. I've thought a lot about this since the invitation, and it always reminds me of what I don't know and what I don't remember. For example, I don't remember much about coming to the UK. Sometimes I'll have these memories around the sound of buses or passion flowers blooming, or being in a pram and picking blackberries on the way to school. And that also takes me back to the social and the inspirations. I'm constantly trying to figure out what makes us social. I commission artists, I lead on complex projects, I work to centre people with complex issues. These issues include displacement, economic hardship, rapid gentrification, and the loss of voice. I work with artists, and I always try to remind people that artists are not social workers. But thankfully, I've been able to work with artists who are attuned to the social, be that through performance, be that through meals, be that through conversations. I think of those artists who work with the voice and giving a voice to those whose voices are not frequently centered. I was born in Ghana. I came to the UK in the 1980s. There was a recession and the UK was recovering from spending all of the money that its colonial powers had granted it. It was all gone. Everyone was having to start again and figure that out again. There was huge moments of social unrest, and historically, major pushes in the UK arts and social policy have been reactive. Notably, these have been in response to breakdowns in relations and dialogues between, I say this in quotes, the establishment and minorities. These breakdowns have often manifested as protest or civil unrest, which the government or establishment would then have to, I say this again in quotes, manage. In 1981, the Scarman Report was for social inclusion. 1997 saw the Macpherson Report in response to the racially motivated murder of Stephen Lawrence. 2011 saw the Riots, Communities and Victims panel. I was going to speak a little bit about symbolic annihilation, but I'll talk you through why I've selected these images. They are the images that represent my earliest experiences of socially engaged practice. Quite a few of these are from a place called Africa House, which was in Dalston, an area that has changed massively over the last, I don't know, it's constantly changing massively, but there's been a real shift in the last 25 or so years in areas such as Hackney, areas such as Peckham, Camden, Islington, and so forth. Right, so Africa House in Dalston was a place where my family and families like mine would meet safely with others of the African diaspora, and we would gain access to legal advice around housing, immigration, education, as well as food and laughter. I spoke previously about my careers, plural, before I came to join the Maelstrom, that's the arts. I worked for legal advisors who dealt with all of those issues. And this was at a grassroots level. And I believe that these experiences have influenced my creative and my social practice because these spaces have all been carried through by various means of celebration. And I try to continue this within my role as a commissioner. These are spaces with multiple mother tongues where the social is formed, and a way to occupy space for those who are frequently unable to be heard, for those who are frequently excluded from the decision-making process, which then leads to displacement, economic hardship, and a loss of voice. Try to make sure that when we work as human microphones. This is a form of protest that uses the voice in spaces where amplified sound is criminalized. Those of you may remember the Occupy Wall Street processes, where protests, beg your pardon, where these voices would carry through a chant to transmit information over a large space. And again, I try to do this through co-commissioning artists, both as an artistic director, as just mentioned, of a charity called Peckham Platform. It's a social arts organisation, and we work to connect people, art and place. And we co-commission and we co-develop artworks with Peckham residents that respond to their needs. We try to make sure to adjust our language and our context. My work is most comfortable, and as such tends to exist outside of the gallery spaces, working to make sure that care is embedded within programs, and just always remembering that people can't engage in art if they are hungry or have to make the decision to eat, travel, or use their phone or eat, which is what many vulnerable communities have gone through, and this has been exacerbated by the effects of COVID pandemic, as well as the economic crisis, or continued economic crisis. So in practical terms, that includes things like making sure that there's hot food, making sure that travel is covered, making sure that people have a space, making sure that this is a context that feels like it belongs to them and their own. The work can exist in church halls. The work can exist in local community centres. The work can exist in public places or a park. And I don't have the answers for how these can bring about structural change, but I do feel that we are working towards that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nefertiti. That was serious food for thought, and just so useful to have that kind of political, social background and context to remind us of what it is that we're actually dealing with from 30 years onwards. Thank you. I'm going to just address a few questions to the two of you, and I'll move straight to Nefertiti for the first one. And this really references or picks up on the way your mode of communication, showing the photos of your family. You move so sort of fluidly between art forms, performance, visual arts, architecture, theatre, etc. And you also embrace a more kind of expansive understanding of what we consider art to be and what we consider the social to be. That was lovely what you said just now about what makes us social. So I just feel like in the arts we make all of these assumptions about what it is that we're doing, and of course we really there are so many more possibilities, rhizomatic possibilities that connect us and have all these interlinking tendrils. And I'm just thinking this approach that you've got really lends itself to socially engaged practice. Does that, obviously that's the reason that you're working within this field, but does that ring true to you? And do you find yourself feeling constrained by the kind of established structures and language of socially engaged artistic practice?
Yes. I had something much more thoughtful to say.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, we are in NPO season, and I know that the UK does have the Arts Council, which has supported many artists I've worked with. It has changed my career. It's changed the work that many of us are able to do, but also recognizing the vulnerabilities within this and how certain pressures can impact the way that we as commissioners engage with artists or also engage with communities. If you've got accessibility issues, having hundreds of pages of spreadsheets and targets isn't the most intuitive way to work with people and to nourish and to support people, or to actually give them a space. I think that language is really important, but also the same for structure. You shouldn't have to have an MA or be edging towards being a PhD candidate to be able to go out and make art.
Yeah. And as I just wanted to bring up this example because Nefertiti told me about it last night, and I just want everyone to listen to this podcast. It's so beautiful. Hopefully Jack's going to put it in the chat, but it's such a great example of how we can expand the sort of understanding of what it is we think of as socially engaged practice. And it's a project called Wind Phone, which a Japanese man set up in his garden 10 years ago when his cousin died. And it's basically a phone box that has a phone in it that doesn't go anywhere. It's a dud phone, and people come along and just speak to their dead relatives. And it's the most incredible service to a huge community. People come from all over Japan to talk to their dead relatives. And I just thought it was an incredibly moving example of what it is we're talking about in this sort of tendrilled world of socially engaged practice. So thank you for that, Nefertiti. Matt, can I go on to ask you a question? A lot of the examples that we've spoken about, including TACO, have been spearheaded by artists rather than institutions, and all the research that I've been doing kind of leads us to that. And it's interesting to see that I think there are more artists listening to this talk than any other group of people. And I'm kind of wondering why you think that is. Is there a more kind of direct route between artists and communities? Is there an issue with the kind of instrumentalization that complicates the relationship between institutions and communities? Or maybe there's the issue of the professionalization of institutions. Sorry, there's too many long words in that sentence. But basically, is there a barrier between community institutions and artists? And yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think actually Nefertiti sort of touched on this in a way, because I feel that it's about being able to form relationships and being aware of the practice of being social. And I think a lot of artists, regardless if they consider themselves as social practitioners, would see their practice as being something that in order to be in the world, it has to form relationships. But in the instance of like artist-led projects, I think artists are really good at that. I think they're really good at forming relationships and cutting through all of that to kind of form relationships which are about individuals and the needs of people, and taking that on board. I know, for example, I don't really want to go on about TACO project, but like Avril, for example, I know the way that she works is that she's had to kind of take on the context and respond to that. And I mean that's why you commission artists to do it, I think, because they're good at being able to go, oh, actually this what's needed is this, you know. And artists that are really good at social practice also are good at the social bit, the relationships. I do think there is a lot of instrumentalization that goes on in the arts and for organizations especially, and that's really hard. And it's sort of interesting to think about like Grand Union, and there are other organizations that are doing this, where they're trying to think more broadly about their role rather than just about artists, but what does it mean culturally and how do you engage? So again, what Nefertiti was saying, like people, you know, in order to kind of engage people in a conversation about culture and creativity and production and all these things, actually you need to address some of the people's needs, like in terms of hierarchy of needs. And so I think that's where organizations are kind of perhaps more, or could have more capacity or more cultural capital to bring to bear on those things,
yeah,
than necessarily artists can as individuals. It sort of depends, but I mean, you know, Catherine Bomb doing company drinks was supported by a commissioning agency to do that. She didn't do it on her own. Not to take away from what she's done. I mean, I don't know what knowledge she has, but I presume that there's a whole team of people helping her to kind of come up with the structure. But I don't know if that answers the question or not.
No, it does beautifully. Thank you, Matt. Nefertiti, do you want to respond to that, or do you want another question?
Just taking what Matt said around using cultural capital or actual capital, which is, I suppose it's I wouldn't say necessarily it's a form of resistance, but it's a form of opening up what we can do as arts organisations and commissioners or curators or producers. And we already, like the majority of us in these roles, have the skills to be able to negotiate that and do the legwork, like the back of house work, to make sure that the people we're working with and commissioning with and growing with in our local communities are able to just get on and either enjoy or think or not be so binary about it.
Yeah. I think the binary issue is really, really key. And linked to that, I sort of often felt when I was looking through a lot of these projects that they were doing amazing things, really important, fantastic things, but are we in danger of over-instrumentalizing them? And I loved what you said, Matt, about the fact that you were offering a space for people to be bored, or to, to do nothing or be bored or something, or to not be productive. And so many of these projects, the aim is to reduce the rent, increase the wages, stop discrimination. They're incredibly focused, really specific, which they have to be, I understand, to act in the world. But what if we embraced or created a totally different system, which didn't create these kind of silos of activities, but rather a kind of framework that recognises, as you say, Nefertiti, this sort of rhizomatic, interlinked way of living in the world, that we're connected to nature and culture and to each other and ourselves in all these stratospherically strange way that we can't even begin to understand. But maybe we could create systems that allow us to fall apart, rather than bring about societal change. I think that's one of the reasons that I just love that example of the guy setting up the phone box at the end of his garden. Basically, that's a social service. It's an opportunity for people to just fall apart. They just cry on the phone to their loved ones. And it's so moving and so brilliant. But anyway, or maybe a system that recognises that socially engaged art projects aren't separate from going to your mum's grand, funeral or your sister's wedding. I think this probably links, Nefertiti, to what my previous question. But I just wanted to, I just thought that was an interesting idea, that maybe, that we could at least do something different with social practice that didn't necessarily mean kind of instrumentalization, and offers this space for people to not act. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Totally. Nefertiti, do you want to?
No, I was just going to say, I think it is really important to have space to be bored, not to be to be over-programmed or overstimulated, or just being able to offer that space for quietness, or like you say, Jess, to being able to just cry, but not be evaluated on that afterwards. Tell us about, did this cry change your life? Or I'm being quite cynical today, but it is to be able to not be so extractive, and to build that within our processes as well, because I think there is that thing about, like we say, the risks of instrumentalizing communities, like you're basically instrumentalizing people's lives and extracting from that. And that seems like an unhealthy, and especially unhealthy way to function. So I don't know, but what Matt said was around funding to be able to get these things going. Like if you have a funder who is brilliant and just says, go off, do this for X amount of years, and tell us what you've learned, and then we'll put that into strategy. That is one way that I've seen has been really helpful. And there's also ways of going into more established institutions and saying, actually, and critiquing them the way that and critiquing the structures that support them, the way that the ICA has been doing very recently as well.
With a brilliant series of projects, absolutely, yeah. I'm just aware of the fact that it's now 10-1. How did that happen? I mean, it feels like it's 15 minutes. So I had all these other questions, but there was just one, Matt, that I think is really important to raise, to sort of acknowledge that we're not inventing anything new here. This is 2022.
No, totally.
There's a whole discussion about community engaged practice that takes us right back to the 60s and 70s. So can you just give us a little kind of recognition of that?
Oh gosh, so I'm not an art historian, or I'm not even a
curator.
So I come at it purely from an artist practitioner point of view, but from my own personal experience, I would say that it's in this country. So I think the other thing is like this, where I'm going to come from is quite a sort of Western centric viewpoint, and probably very UK based. So I mean, like, and it goes back actually to my first slide, which is art for people, or art make community, and probably also in the examples. So from the 60s, 70s, obviously people like Barbara, I can never say her surname, Savini, how do you say her surname?
Barbara Savini of APG, yeah.
The artist placement group, which you know, this idea of like expanding artists out into the world. And this is something that I hold really dear, actually, as a philosophy, which is that artists are not just in the studio and a gallery, but actually, what does it mean to put artists in society? And the work that they did, which was about putting artists in contexts and contexts where they could influence change on structures. So they put them in companies and big organizations, and this sort of model is something that we see all the time now, like residencies in companies and so forth. But at the time it was really radical, and you know, it still is. It's massive influence on the concept of what an artist is and where they exist in the world. And then the other movement that was alongside that was the community arts movement. And now, you know, you could argue that, you know, making art form community is what community arts does. Not all community arts does that very well, actually. I think some of it can be really sort of spectacular, more about that than actually about the kind of formation of community, and that's principally because it's really hard to document what the outcomes are and the process and stuff. But the community arts movement was, at the time when it started, was really, really radical, because what it did was it challenged the hierarchies of art production, and we're living with that legacy now. I mean, I think the Arts Council would not be the way that it is if it wasn't for the community arts. Like, you can even argue that it influenced ideas around neoliberalism and democratization of culture and creativity and all these things. And there are lots of organizations that are really based on this kind of, or lots of programs, if you like, and projects that are based on this idea of democratizing and
the democratization
sharing the meaning
of
production. Yeah, and so, you know, yeah, I mean, and there are loads and loads and loads of examples.
Yeah, no, but that was really nice. We've got the sort of APG approach on one side, and, you know, the community arts angle on the other. But I do remember learning that the Arts Council refused APG's application on the grounds that it was more to do with social engineering than with straight art. I thought that was quite a good quote to give for today. Like, see how the tide has turned. It's quite incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there are other examples like Martha Rosler's If You Were Here from 1989 at the Dear Art Foundation, where she turned the gallery into a kind of site for activism around homelessness and housing injustices, and group materials work from the 80s and 90s around the AIDS crisis. There are all these quite particular models. And also it's quite interesting that we sort of in our minds know the sort of art ones like APG and, you know, material and Martha Rosler and stuff, but it's quite hard to think of really good examples of community arts projects because they're not so aestheticized or conceptualized or written about or talked about. It's more the sort of general approach.
It's I mean, they've kind of been ostracized from the canon in a way, like it's because it's not seen. I guess it doesn't add to. I mean, it's not part of the structure, you know. I mean, you know, most people will be really familiar with the sort of social turn that art took in the 90s, and then, you know, and then you get a kind of, you know, Battle of Orgrave and all those sort of spectacular kind of ideas of participation. But I think the community arts really has this sort of social practice really at its heart. Is which is what Nefertiti is talking about, you know, like relationships, supporting people, listening to people.
Giving people time and place. Talking of which, I want to bring in some questions from the audience. We've got a few in the Q&A box if you want to have a look at those, Nefertiti and Matt. And I'm going to go for the one at the top, which is, I think, for both of you. What do you think is important in the relationship between the artist and curator / commissioner in making this kind of work happen? Who has the power? Nefertiti, do you want to go for that one?
My first, thank you to whoever has asked that question. I suppose my first response to that is, what is power? Because I suppose I was thinking, well, the commissioner has a lot of authority, but then that should be ceded so the artist has space to develop their practice. And so we're not out there making the work and engaging in the same way that the artists are. So I don't know if I could consider it to be about power, but I do appreciate the point that there is risk, or appreciate the thinking that there is risk for things like exploitation in how artists are commissioned, the contracts that they receive, how much space they have. But I think if you really are commissioning someone, you, first of all, do your research, follow your gut, and give them the space to do that. So I do find the idea of power a tricky one, but maybe because we do work, or I have tried to go out of my way to be very open and nurturing, and also, what's the word, like vouching for the artist, because you can't always think like the artist. So you do have,
and you shouldn't always think like the artist, yeah.
Because, yeah, exactly. So that is, I do find that one a tricky one. I hope that has answered it.
Yeah.
What's important is trust. You have to trust each other, and you have to be able to nurture each other and give people space. Give the artist the space to do their work, but also check in just to see that they're actually okay, because it is work. It's not just like, I don't know, rubbing leaves and producing an artwork. Like, it's actual graft that artists go through. It's a tremendous amount of work they do.
I think the word curator is probably the wrong, like, that's not my conception of it really. So I mean, I come at it as an artist talking to another artist, but I primarily I sort of see my role as more as a producer in relation to it. So it's, you know, and then there's another side to that, which is a whole other set of relationships, community relationships, when we're working in a socially engaged way, where in a way I also have responsibility for those as well. But I sort of see it more as facilitation. I mean, that's how we do it at TACO. It tends to be a bit more kind of generous in that sense. And I tend to be quite uncomfortable with the idea of like curating it. It's more about letting the artist lead and then supporting that to make sure that it works.
And acknowledge that the artist needs support, especially with these types of projects that can be incredibly extractive and emotionally sort of overwhelming. The sort of, I think the point of responsibility that an artist feels to a community is extraordinary. It's not the same as, you know, many other arts types jobs. There's a question further on down the bottom. There's so many nice questions. Thanks so much, everyone. That I quite like. How do you exit when a project does finally come to an end? What responsibility do artists and arts organisations have to those they engage with? I think this is really important, and this links back to the instrumentalisation discussion about, you know, sort of how institutions use these types of projects to their own ends, and just kind of, you know, leave a community to do what it needs to do after it's finished. And actually, is that viable? You know,
legacy.
Me? I was going to defer that to you, Matt. Okay, so when the project finally does come to an end, the responsibility that we have, so there's two, my brain is going off into two rhizomatic strands here. One of them is that we form long-term relationships with communities. So it's not an in and out process, like, I don't know, just like art ambush and then go off into the wild with all your data cackling for your next funding application. It's that you will see people grow up, and that is the intention. So even if the project finishes, the relationship still needs to be maintained. That doesn't mean weekly check-ins, but it can be, do you want to talk with us? Do you want to go for a walk and talk? What are you up to since we last saw you? And that's quite important with the time that we need for the artists, checking in on them with their processes and their progress and how they found it. And with, I suppose, also communities, it is knowing that it's an offer rather than an obligation. So if they don't ever want to see us again, we'll find out why, but it's absolutely fine. And then see about how there may be shorter term ways of maintaining that relationship. Pass over to Matt.
I think what Nefertiti said really, which is, yeah, relationships. A lot of the time it's like building relationships. The activity or the project is just a process by which a relationship is formed or strengthened, or I mean, I sort of see all the projects we do are about building community, and so there's part of that legacy. I also think that there are some projects that we do where, in fact, quite a lot of them, we try to think about the legacy of, like, if we're working with people, what is the legacy? How do we, what is the, I mean, exit strategy sort of sounds really military, but but ultimately there is this idea of, like, okay, so what happens afterwards? You know, if people, and that's a conversation 9 times out of 10. It's like, what do people want? And some people just like, that's it, I haven't got time for this, or that was brilliant, I loved it, or I really want to do more, you know, and in which case that's what we're trying to do. And
that presupposes that you have an ongoing relationship to the place. So it's not a project that just comes in, is realised, and then you all move out. I think what's key here is that you're both working in organisations in the neighbourhood, in the locale where you live. So that's absolutely key as far as I can see. I'm going to just look through the other questions. There's one for Nefertiti. You mentioned adjusting your language to facilitate collaboration with local communities in Peckham. Could you expand on this, please? I don't know when that was, maybe in your presentation, but, you know.
Thank you for the question. So without getting overly heavy in the theoretical, with the ideas of a text and the things that connect us, like whether that be music or everyone knowing the chorus when a beat is about to drop, or everybody having read the same newspaper that day, or everybody having gone to the same places when they were growing up. I would say through adjusting the language is recognizing the need to go to where people are comfortable and where they thrive. So it's not about dragging people into your building. It's more about, sorry, it's not about dragging people into your building. It is about going to where they are. So the language in this context could be things like making sure there's music when people walk into a room, making sure that there's hot food, making artworks or the artistic processes connect with the things that people are already doing. So if we're collating data, this could be via WhatsApp or by phone messages. It can be through getting artists in who work more with communal language, or work with, so for example, the work that Larry Achampong's doing with gaming rooms, as well as like video games or music or dancing or just hanging out. Like that to me is the language. So if you think about the language of an exhibition, most people tend to think of mixtapes as well, Matt, right? Like these are the ways that
yeah, exactly.
So it is that way of so that's what I mean by language. It's just the codes that we use to be able to engage with people. Yeah. So outside of a white cube space, into a local park, going foraging, or just going for a walk up the street. I hope that answers. Sorry.
Oh, no, that was beautiful. That was really lovely. How to meet people as they come in. It's really nice. Matt, did you have anything to say about that, or shall I go on to the next question?
I think going to the next question.
Okay. Okay. There's a question here about the disconnect between how things get done in cultural institutions, and the content they program. So, serious redundancies from major arts organisations alongside, socially engaged projects that deem to do the absolute opposite, which obviously links to the Maria Icon example that you gave, Matt. And it's absolutely true. There's a lot of virtue signalling in arts organisations.
Yeah. And I think there is a need to rethink how organisations are organised, effectively, on what the culture of organisations are. So, seriously, I think that's what we need to be doing. Is we need to thinking, how are we organised? How do we run? How do we make decisions? How do we relate to people? What is our relationship to a community? What is community? Who is our community? And so that would be my response to that. And that's why I think someone like Grand Union is really interesting, because what they're doing is challenging themselves, challenging the role of artists, challenging what does it mean to be here. It's important.
So that's radically thinking about the way that large organisations, we are talking about the big.
Yeah, I think what interesting, we talk about community arts and its influence actually, its legacy was the creation of outreach and education within kind of big arts organizations needed to kind of then open up, and what you have this siloed set of thinking, and I think there is a need to go a bit further to think about how do these things, how are they really represented culturally within the organization and the way it does things.
Yeah. Okay, we're almost coming to an end now, but there's lots more questions. It's really nice. This is for both of you. How to create reciprocal relationships with the people you work with, especially when the demand of responsibility, increase through the engagement. I think that's gone to the top now. If you want to read that, I didn't read it very well. So, how to create reciprocal relationship with the people you work with, especially when the demand of responsibility increases through the engagement.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I think, is it how to create reciprocal relationship with the people you work with? Oh, so okay, so is it around expectations and I guess like what you can and can't, what?
Yeah, expectation, I think, is the way that I took it.
I think there's honesty. I think there's being human and sort of saying, having a relationship in the first place, caring about people, knowing what they're doing, being generous as much as you can. It goes both ways. It's really, the reciprocal thing is interesting because so I'm going to use an example. So there's a guy that I know who we run a community radio station, and he was involved in the pilot, and he's been involved since the beginning. And his knowledge that he brings to the station is that he's really technical. So he basically built the radio station. But he comes to see us every week. Every week he comes in, and it's important for him that he's useful, and so there is this sort of interesting reciprocal relationship where he is useful when we kind of acknowledge that, but he also comes in just for a chat, and sometimes he helps me hang pictures on the wall and stuff, or he's helped me install exhibitions and things before, and actually what's at the heart of it is just a genuine relationship of like, it's Mike, it's part of our family. He comes in, he does things, he's getting something out of it, we're getting something out of it. The social part of it, the social practice part of it is where the reciprocal relationship is in that. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely, that's lovely. I'm aware of the fact that we're now we need to wind up. Nefertiti, was there anything you wanted to say in response to that? Don't feel you have to, but I just wanted to give you the time if you wanted to.
I'll be super quick. If it counts as reciprocal, maybe going back to that question about power, finally starting to understand power now. But I suppose the question that I would ask at the beginning, or once a relationship has been established, is what do people need? And like the arts and arts organizations are a great Trojan horse to enact change through soft methodologies. So figuring out what people need, and we can figure out the rest.
Perfect. Thank you, Nefertiti. And thank you, Matt. You've been really generous, wonderful speakers. And I think we've covered a lot of ground in terms of strategies that we might adopt to create these types of projects and challenge the rules embedded within these projects. And the fact that we need to create and hold space for people to bring about sort of culture of solidarity and agency and community and exchange. There's obviously so much more to discuss, and that's obviously beyond the realm of this hour-long session. But we will continue the discussion in future events and in other forms. And I'll be writing up a paper that comes out of all of this, these events. So look out for that in your email box in the autumn. I think it'll be sometime. So I think the next talk is the 15th of June, but Elizabeth's going to tell you a little bit more about that now. But finally, before I hand over to Elizabeth, I just want to massively thank Matt and Nefertiti for putting so much thought and care and time into this event. It's really, really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Jes, Matt and Nefertiti, for this really inspiring conversation. There is clearly so much for everyone to learn and continue thinking more broadly about the role of artists and art organizations to form relationships with individuals and communities, acknowledging the hierarchy of needs, being responsive, and thinking about what legacy we leave behind. Thank you so much to our audience for participating, for all the comments and the questions you've shared in the chat. As Jes mentioned earlier, this is the second event in the Constellations Assembly 2022 series. And we really want to listen and build on your feedback for future events. To that end, you'll see in the Slido bar a questionnaire, which we would be really grateful if you could please complete before you leave. It shouldn't take too long. And I very much hope we see you at the next Constellations Assembly event. What is the role of democracy in social practice? Can all voices be heard? This event will ask, how do socially engaged artists and practitioners navigate the tensions between democracy and inclusivity? How should decisions be made during the process of collaboration between artists and communities? And how can all voices be heard, represented, and included? I think some of these points were already introduced during the conversation earlier. We will be announcing the full lineup of speakers for the next event via our social media channels in a couple of weeks' time. So do sign up to our Instagram and Twitter if you haven't already. We will also upload a recording of today's event on our YouTube channel that will include captions, which you'll be able to link to from our website. And please do sign up to our mailing list for more information about Constellations Assembly and our projects program more generally. Finally, a huge thank you to our amazing speakers, to the Art Fund, the Arts Council England, Barton Hibbett Associates, Constellations patrons, and UP supporters for supporting this program, and to our partners, Flatiron House and Liverpool Biennial, and to the Constellations programming team, Jack Newbury, Lily Hager. Let's keep the conversation going, and really looking forward to seeing you all at the next one. Thank you so much.